Welcome back to the Investor Professor podcast. This is Dr. Ryan Peckham, and this is episode 82. On today's episode, we're going to talk about Davos. Davos, Switzerland is home to the World Economic Forum, and we're going to discuss why is Davos important, why do CEOs attend this, why is it important if you're into business to kind of have knowledge about what goes on in Davos. So get your mind right. Let's get to work. Okay, well, welcome back, everybody. Thanks again for joining me. So before we get into the Davos conference, let's just discuss the market this past week. So the S&P 500 is now up 3.47% for the year. You have the Dow's only up 0.69 for the year, and the NASDAQ is up 6.44% already this year. So midweek, the market did not look good. We had a great rally yesterday, and we just keep going back to this. Are we going to have a recession? Is it going to be a big recession? Is it going to be a mild recession? It's just the same thing over and over and over again, which in 5 years isn't going to matter. But it is interesting when you look at, the market and you look at the indexes. So the S&P 500, the NASDAQ, and the Dow, you look at who performed the best and worst last year, right? In 2022, NASDAQ got absolutely obliterated, and it's leading the markets this year. And so this goes along with last week's episode where I talked about changing lanes and being careful of switching your investments up based on what's hot at the moment. And I really don't feel like I did that great of a job last week talking about it. I might need to revisit that and just discuss this a little bit more depth when I can kind of, articulate it better. But it is the danger. And so you look at, some of the stocks that performed poorly this week. As you look at like United Healthcare, who had great numbers and still sold off this week, Coca-Cola, Pepsi, kind of the safer stocks. Procter & Gamble reported earnings this past week. Basically, the stock traded down, and then it came back up. And the reason is because they talked about how they didn't do well in the quarter, but it's because they didn't have any sales in Russia or different places like that. So the quarter really wasn't that bad. But when you look at the technology companies doing better, the money has to come from somewhere. So at the end of last year, everybody sells out of Amazon, Google, Microsoft, all the big name technology companies, and they put it into the safer companies. Now the outlook doesn't look as bad. So they're selling all the safer companies, putting it back into the riskier companies. And you just see this, this transition from one to the other. So you have to be very careful. Again, you have to be very careful in, changing strategies, moving money around. And a lot of times, the best course of action is just to stay the course. Remember why you invested in a company. I mean, you're looking at it's going to do well over time. And so you look at some of these technology companies, and obviously they've made a lot of headlines with laying people off. And so just the other day, Google, or not just the other day, yesterday, Google announced that they're going to let go of 12,000 people. And so on that news, Google was up $5 basically yesterday on that news. So it went from $93 to $98 a share. And it's interesting that, companies go up when they let somebody go. And the reason is because they become instantly more profitable, right? So when you think about a company's profitability, there's really two ways for a company to be profitable. One is for their revenue to go up, right? Their sales number to go up, more demand for their product. That's the one you want to see. And then the second one is to cut expenses. And so the easiest one is to let people go. If you let people go, all of a sudden you become more profitable right away. But that's one you can't keep doing, right? You can't just keep letting people go. We saw this with banks in 2008, and now we're seeing it with technology companies for younger workers, especially young tech workers. It's the first time that they've ever, they're kind of shocked by companies or especially technology companies letting people go. I mean, this did happen in 2001, 2002. So if you're older, you kind of remember those days, or especially 2008, 2009. I mean, this does happen. And so, Google's number of letting 12,000 people go is interesting because it's the amount that they hired last year. It's the same number. And so, just to give you perspective on this, it sounds like a lot. Like, this is where, me being kind of a financial nerd, I get frustrated when you just hear these numbers and there's no context, put to them. So, for example, Google lays off 12,000 people. I mean, what does that mean? How many is that? Is it really an important number? And so you look at Google and they have 186,000 employees. And so they're letting 12,000 of them go. Meta has 87,000 employees. They let 10,000 go. Microsoft has 222,000 employees. They let 10,000 go. And so that's the second largest layoff Microsoft's ever done. The largest one, I believe, is 14,000 employees years ago. And then you have Amazon, who let 18,000 go, but they have 1.5 million employees. So when you look at the percentages here, Google let go of 6% of their workforce, right? And so you look at Meta, and just doing some math here real quick. Should have done this before I started. That's 11% of their workforce. And then you look at, Amazon, and that's basically 1% of their workforce. So, when you hear numbers out there in the press or whatever, they sound big or whatnot, you really have to be able to put them into context. So we'll see, these companies. One of the most notable ones that hasn't laid people off yet is Apple. And Apple did not hire that many employees during the pandemic. Apple's very selective on who they hire. They're very selective on adding expenses. And so, a lot of these layoffs that the other companies are doing are employees they hired during the pandemic, where they expected, that trend, the pandemic trends, to continue. And obviously we've seen that they haven't. So it does, it is good for them to clean this up. It will be better, even though it's painful in the middle. It's going to be better, especially if you're a shareholder, for them not to have so many people on the books. And so it is sad that, people are getting laid off and they're having to look for work. But long term, it's going to provide for each company to be a little bit healthier. So I keep looking at this. I'm like, Meta has 87,000 employees, or I guess now they have 77. Like, what do all those people do for Meta? Like, how do they have that many employees? I mean, I guess, I don't know, engineers or something. I mean, it doesn't seem like it would take much to run Meta. It seems like you would just need servers and some air conditioning and things of that nature. I mean, I think it's almost comical. Elon Musk has let so many people go from Twitter. And from all the reports I've seen, or even me just getting on the app, I have noticed absolutely zero difference in how the app performs. So, it's something that all companies, even if you're a small entrepreneur, you have to pay attention to your expenses. And as companies start to do better, they start to make more money. It's easy to become a little bit lax on the expenses. Same thing in your personal life. You start making more money, all of a sudden it's easy to let these expenses creep in. Same thing that happens in your personal life happens if you were to own a business, and especially if you own a very profitable business. It's easy to kind of lose the discipline as far as keeping control of your expenses. So it's something that everybody, every person, every business, every entrepreneur, it's something that you have to make sure that you're proactive on, so that when times aren't as good, you can weather the storms. So the title of this episode is Davos. And so this past week was the World Economic Forum, and it is held in Davos, Switzerland, a small mountain town in Switzerland, which is kind of why it's called just Davos now. It's been hosted there since 1971, but recently it's gotten a lot more press. It's definitely one of the bigger conferences in the world, just as far as business is concerned. Everybody is excited to hear what CEOs and different leaders have to say. And just to give you an example of how big this thing is, there were 2,700 attendees from 130 countries this year, 27% of which were from the United States. And 634 of those attendees were CEOs of major companies around the world. So 1 in 4 attendees, it was a major CEO, including Andy Jassy from Amazon, Jamie Dimon from JP Morgan Chase, David Solomon from Goldman Sachs. You have Jane Fraser from Citigroup, Larry Fink from BlackRock. A lot of major banks are there. Alex Karp from Palantir is usually there. CNBC sent 13 people. Even Stanford University had 7 attendees. I'm not sure who they are, but I did see that number. And so this year's Davos theme was cooperation in a fragmented world, where they were looking at global markets, political relationships, and how those have been affected since the pandemic. They looked at cost of living, tight labor market, extreme weather. Is there going to be a recession in 2023? And so these are all the things that were discussed. CNBC did a great job. They did coverage from there all week. You can go to CNBC, and they actually have a special Davos section where you can go and listen to interviews with some of the CEOs that they had. It's a great way to just kind of get a baseline of what these CEOs are thinking and how they think the year's going to go. This is the normal time. This is when it normally happens. In January is when Davos is normally held. And for the past couple of years, obviously, because of the pandemic, they haven't been able to do it. And it's also a very big lightning rod for activists. So like Greta Thunberg was there, discussing climate change and all that, and talking about how, the people that are here are the ones causing the biggest problems because most of them take their private jets, and it's a very big show. There's a lot of billionaires there, and there's kind of jokes about how there's billionaires there teaching millionaires what a normal person is thinking, right? So, there is a lot of just talk about how the people that are there are not normal society, that they're not plugged into what the real person around the world is dealing with and the challenges that they're dealing with. And so there's lightning rods kind of all over this thing. And so when I look at this, when I'm looking at this, I really look at what the CEOs are saying. I mean, obviously there's all the political stuff, there's all the all of that stuff that goes along with it. But with my job, right, my job is to make people money and to do well with the investments that I make for people. So I like being plugged in on that side. I really try to not get too tied into the political stuff over my career. That has definitely been very beneficial, because no matter who's in office, no matter what's going on, my job stays the same. And so listening to some of these interviews, one of the things that I found to be very interesting was that a lot of CEOs that seem to be much more negative last year, and that's kind of the benefit of kind of watching these year after year, is you kind of get a handle of what people's thoughts are. You look at, they don't seem as negative as they were last year. So a lot of them last year were talking about a recession is definitely going to be here. It's going to be a strong recession. Now they're coming back saying, well, it could be a mild recession. And so, all this macroeconomic stuff is just grabbing hold of all the headlines. And so, it's important to pay attention to it, but you also have to realize you have no control over it. If you're doing research on a company, you can look at the company, you can look at their numbers, you can calculate anything you want, but, that company doesn't have control over what interest rates are going to do. And so, right now, when you look at the market, the Fed is telling you that they think interest rates are going to go to around 5%, maybe a little above 5%, and they're going to hang out there for a while. And so one of the speakers at Davos was a guy named Larry Summer. He's a professor at Harvard. He used to be the Treasury Secretary. And he was saying that, he thinks that the interest rates will go to 5%, and they'll stay there for a while. And one of the reasons that they're wanting to do that is if you go back to, look at your history lesson here, back in the 1970s, we kind of had the same issue that we're having today. This is around 1972, 1973. No, I'm not that old. I wasn't alive then either. But 1972, 1973, inflation starts to grow. Fed raises interest rates. They bring inflation down, and then they start bringing interest rates down at the as inflation comes down. And so everybody thought, hey, we beat inflation, no problem here. We did it. Congratulations, high five everywhere. And then all of a sudden, a couple of years later, inflation comes back even stronger, and it's even stickier, right? And this is when you have the early 80s. And you have Paul Volcker, and he has to raise interest rates to an incredibly high level, almost 13%, because they never really beat inflation the first time. And so that is what we are dealing with because, the Fed, a lot of them were alive during those times. They remember those times, and they're going to do everything they can to prevent that from happening again today. And so when you hear the Fed chairman and the Fed presidents, discuss this, that's why they're saying we're committed to the job of bringing inflation down. We are committed to the job of bringing inflation down. And even though we get better numbers and the numbers are coming down, they're basically saying we don't want it to be a head fake. We don't want to get tricked into thinking we beat this thing and then we didn't, because then we're going to have to raise even higher the next time. And so that's why they're talking about raising the rates up. The next meeting is February 1st, but raising the rates up to pretty close to 5%, maybe a little over, we'll see, and then holding the rates steady. And so, you look at the ramifications of that, and we've talked about that on this podcast already. But, it is one of those things. It is painful, but we're so much closer now than we were a year ago, right? Because we've gone through 7 Fed hikes already. I mean, right now we're at 4.25, somewhere around there. And so getting to 5 doesn't seem that far. And so you have the stock market looking ahead going, okay, even if we get to 5, what is that going to look like? What are the companies that are going to perform well during that period of time? And the stock market is always forward looking. So when you see these companies laying off people, Google, like we just discussed, the market is going, okay, they're laying these people off. That means that this company is going to be more profitable next quarter than they were this quarter. And so, that's why most of the time the market has already bottomed when the clouds start to clear, and even sometimes when the clouds haven't cleared, is because the market is forward looking. And so, we'll see. We'll see how this goes, and we'll see who's going to be right. I really try not to make predictions on this because I don't really think it's impactful to too many portfolios. I think if you have good, solid companies with good management teams, they're going to be able to figure it out. And, over time, that's really what's going to matter. It's not really so much about what's going to happen, quarter on interest rates and the like. I forgot to bring it up in the beginning, but I want to discuss some of the earnings that came out this week since we are in the middle of earnings season. And the big one this past week was Netflix. So Netflix reported earnings. Their earnings were they were okay. They missed their earnings per share number. But what really got the market excited, and yesterday they were up 26.72 a share, 8.5%, which is a big move to 342, is the fact that they added 4.87 million subscribers in the past quarter. So they had a lot of people sign back up for Netflix on their platform that allows for commercials to make the service a little bit cheaper, and are definitely on a path to profitability. This stock peaked at $690 on October 1st of 2021. And then its low last June 1st of 2022, was $175 a share. And so that is obviously a massive drop. And then now it's all the way back up to 342. And so, if you bought it under $200, congratulations. You had to be pretty brave to do that. But Netflix is looking a lot better than it did a year ago. But one of the things I thought was interesting, so they're going to start cracking down on people sharing passwords, and they think that there's 100 million 100 million users that are sharing passwords with people who aren't paying for the service. And so if they really start to crack down on that, and I don't really know how they're going to do it, or I'd share that with you. But even if they were to get 25 million of those, 25% to really sign up for the service, it would have a tremendous impact on the profitability of Netflix. And so when you look at some of the other streaming services that have really been beat up and are really having a hard time being profitable, Netflix seems like a pretty bright star in that sector. So, one to look at, but it's just amazing how many people they're really adding. Really blew the expectations away just from the number of ads. So, that's what people are looking at, or analysts are looking at. And so you look at this week, Tesla is going to be one of the big companies that reports this week. And so as we really get in here, the next couple of weeks, we'll be discussing, of course, some of the technology earnings that we have coming out, seeing how those look. A lot of nervous people when it comes to those. So, all right, well, that's all I got this week. Go to CNBC or go look up some of the interviews from Davos. I think it's a good learning experience. Go see what some of these CEOs have said, see why this conference is important, and it'll help increase your knowledge base for sure. So I appreciate you joining me. Hope you have a great week. Don't mistake activity for achievement. I'll see you next time. Thanks, everybody.